Good evening, everyone. Tonight, I'm going to be doing something a little different. The stories I will be reading you are a passion of mine, and I hope that you will enjoy them too. With that being said, let's go back to ashes, for when we return to the ashes, we arise a better, stronger, and happier person in the morning. I present this collection of creepy urban myths. Guiles Corey, who lived August 1611 to September 19, 1692, was an English-born American farmer who was accused of witchcraft, along with his wife, Martha Corey, during the Salem witch trials. Between 1692 and 1693, the people of Salem prosecuted at least 200 people for witchcraft. 19 people were executed, including a local man named Guiles Corey. Guiles Corey was a prosperous Salem farmer who, along with his third wife, was accused of witchcraft on April 18, 1692. Corey was 80 years old at the time of his arrest. Reports claim that he actually believed the witchcraft accusations leveled against his wife until he was also arrested. One of his accusers claimed that she had seen Corey appear as a spirit before her. She claimed that his spirit tortured her and forced her to pledge her soul to the devil. Corey refused to plead either guilty or innocent. Under the law at the time, a person who did not plead couldn't be tried for a crime. Unfortunately, authorities exploited a grisly loophole in the law by subjecting Corey to peine forte et dure, meaning hard and forceful punishment. This was an attempt to force him to plea. On September 17th, Sheriff George Corwin ordered wooden boards to be across Corey's naked body and heavy stones to be slowly added. Corey endured this death by pressing for 3 days without crying out in pain. He was asked to enter a plea 3 times. Each time he replied, "More weight." Corey died on the 3rd day, but not before uttering a curse on the town of Salem and on the sheriff of the town. Corey's ghost is said to have been seen walking the Howard Street Cemetery before every major disaster that has struck Salem. He was allegedly seen the night before the Great Salem Fire of 1914. However, the creepiest part of the legend may be the belief that Corey's curse has afflicted every person who has taken the position of sheriff of Essex County. Chillingly, every sheriff since Corwin has supposedly died or resigned due to a blood or heart problem. The curse is said to have been broken by the decision to move the sheriff's office from Salem to Middleton in 1991. Since then, Salem's sheriffs have stopped dying from heart and blood problems. The Three-Legged Lady of Nash Road. The legend of the Three-Legged Lady is by far one of the creepiest urban legends associated with Mississippi. For years, locals have told the story of the phantom woman and the lonely stretch of road she haunts. According to legend, the Three-Legged Lady haunts Nash Road, which is not far from the lock and dam in Columbus, Mississippi. But the Three-Legged Lady doesn't just haunt the area. She torments drivers by chasing their cars down the dark roadway. As the story goes, motorists who want to see the Three-Legged Lady should stop on Nash Road, turn off the headlights, and honk the horn 3 times. After doing so, the Three-Legged Lady knocks on the roof of the car and then races the driver to the end of the road, hitting the car with her body the entire time. Some say the Three-Legged Lady of Nash Road was secretly seeing a Civil War veteran who was murdered and cast off Nash Road Bridge by the lady's husband when their fidelity was discovered. The veteran's leg was snagged on the fall down and separated from his body. Some claim that, in a fit of grief, the lady recovered the leg, sewed it onto her own body, and haunted the church where his funeral was held following her own death. Others tell of an even more tragic story, where the lady of Nash Road was wife of a farmer, whose visits into town became more and more frequent to the point of suspicion. The women at her church would laugh at the lady, knowing that she wasn't enough for her husband, which angered her greatly. The wife followed him into town one day to discover that he was indeed cheating on her. That night, she whipped up a special dinner involving poison, which promptly killed the husband. The people of the church began to whisper about her having potentially murdered her husband after several weeks of his absence and excuses that no longer pacified. Knowing that she was on borrowed time, the lady of Nash Road barred the exit to the church one Sunday morning during church service and set the building ablaze, watching excitedly as those who so loved to gossip about her got their comeuppance. She sewed the leg of her dead husband to her body so that they could be together for eternity, and is said to haunt the charred church grounds and kill any who trespass upon it. The Phantom Hitchhiker of Blackhorse Lake. This particular tale takes place just off Highway 87 in Cascade County, north of Great Falls in the Blackhorse Lake area. This area is home to what some call the most aggressive phantom hitchhiker in the United States. Reports tell of a tall Native American man with long black hair, inconspicuously hitching a ride. Some claim to spot him in bib overalls. Others say he dons a denim jacket and jeans. However, when drivers get close enough to the figure, he suddenly appears in front of the car, rolling onto the windscreen with a deathly thud. Many people react to the obvious manner, screeching to a halt and getting out to check to see if the poor fellow is okay. Of course, in true spectral fashion, the man is nowhere to be seen, and the car is always without a scratch. This is both a positive and a negative, as though no physical damage has been dealt. The driver must now continue their lives with no proof to themselves or others that they really witnessed what they think they did. With no proof, the whole ordeal can easily be passed off as a trick of the overactive imagination, though this particular phenomenon has occurred so frequently and with such similarity that it has cemented itself in the annals of international urban legends forever. Many believe that this is the ghost of a transient Native American whose nomadic lifestyle was violently interrupted one night by a passing car that struck him. Many renditions of the tale state that the man is forced to relive his last brutal moments on Earth in an infinity loop, conjuring an even greater horror to the nightmare. The Haunted Isles of Shoals. Nearly 150 years after it happened, the Isle of Shoals is famous as the haunted islands where the most gruesome murders in Granite State history unfolded. In the early 1870s, Maureen and John Hontevet were two people living on Smutty Nose Island. When Louis Wagner, another fisherman, appeared on the island, they couldn't help developing a friendship in the close quarters. Eventually, John hired Louis, and he moved into the Hontevet's home. At the time, Maureen's sister Karen moved to the Isle of Shoals and began working for another family on the island. Soon after, Marine's brother and his wife, Annette, also moved into the Hauntvet household. However, Lewis soon left to make a living on the mainland. But luck was not in his favor, and he was soon destitute, so much so that he decided to rob the Hauntvets. On a night when he knew that the men were on the mainland, he rode an amazing 12 miles to Smutty Nose Island, where the three women had just tucked in for the night. It is said that Lewis intended to rob the house undetected, but when he woke Karen, the violence began. Karen was attacked with a chair, while Annette was killed in the moonlight with an axe blow to the head. Marine, realizing that her sister and sister-in-law could not be helped, hid beneath a rock on the jagged shoreline, despite the freezing winter night. Lewis searched the island for Marine, but couldn't find her. After making himself a cup of coffee, leaving bloody handprints on the pot, he disappeared. Marine waited out the night in the surf, not daring to leave until 8 a.m. the next morning, when she was able to flag down workers on the adjoining island. The police were notified and the island searched. Lewis's boat was discovered in Newcastle, and the police received a tip that he was on the train to Boston. He was arrested there later that evening. As he was transported back to Portsmouth, angry mobs demanded justice in the well-publicized case. On June 5, 1875, he was hanged for the murders of Karen and Annette. Although justice was delivered, it is said that Karen and Annette still haunt Smutty Nose Island. Even Marine, who survived the attack, is said to wail from the rock that provided him refuge that horrible night. The Hayden family curse. Legend has it that many years ago, the entire Hayden family perished as victims of a curse. The curse was so serious that it took down an entire lineage and still managed to bother people after everyone else was dead. William Henry Hayden moved his family to Albany, Vermont in the early 1800s. He borrowed money from his mother-in-law, Mercy Dale, who was a widow and financially well off, but he never repaid her. Several years later, he found himself in severe financial trouble. He once again approached Mercy and requested additional money. After much complaining and refusing, she became mysteriously ill and accused William of poisoning her. In 1809, as she lay dying in the presence of her daughter, Silence, she uttered an ominous curse in which she declared, "The Hayden name shall die in the third generation, and the last to bear the name shall die in poverty." Life went on, and the curse was forgotten. Will Hayden's daughters all got married and supplied the couple with several grandchildren. But the family's luck and fortunes quickly took a turn for the worse. Of the couple's 4 sons, all but one died young. The one that survived, Henry, was named after his father. He slowly started to show signs of erratic behavior. Will and his wife, Azabah, became estranged after Will lost most of the family fortune. He later also lost his eyesight. Will, at one point, fled to Canada to avoid his creditors. He died later in New York, penniless. Will's son, Henry Jr., built an extravagantly furnished home for his family in 1854 after his father's death. As Henry Jr. continued to grow unstable, his mother cut him out of the will. He had one daughter named Mamie. He died in 1910 of a cerebral hemorrhage. Henry Jr.'s body was carried in a horse-drawn hearse that passed his old home on the way to the cemetery. The curtains in the windows were shut in tribute, but by this time his mansion had been empty for 20 years because he could no longer afford to live in it. The only Hayden left alive was Henry Jr.'s daughter, Armorina, or, as she was known, Mamie. All that was left of her inheritance was an unsavory family reputation and a large number of unpaid bills. Ill and humiliated, she moved to Waterville, Maine, where she died alone in poverty in 1927. She was the last victim of Maurice Dale's curse. The Headless Bride ghost of Old Faithful Inn. Yellowstone has many ghost stories, but the most famous tale is that of a headless bride who walks down the stairs from the crow's nest in the Old Faithful Inn. The legend of Yellowstone's most notorious ghost begins in 1915 in New York, when the teenage daughter of a wealthy shipping company owner rejected her arranged marriage. She had fallen in love with a much older man who worked in their house as a servant and wanted to marry him instead. Despite her father's attempts to talk her out of the union, the heiress married the servant. Heartbroken, her father offered the couple a significant dowry as a wedding gift, on the condition that they would leave New York forever. To his surprise, they agreed. The pair traveled to Yellowstone for their honeymoon, which is when things began to go south. The couple booked a room at the Old Faithful Inn, and it didn't take long for the new bride to see the error in her judgment. Her husband spent their dowry playing poker and eating and drinking in excess, and 1 month into their honeymoon trip, they ran out of money. The bride telephoned her father to ask for more money, but he denied her request. One night, hotel staff allegedly heard the couple arguing loudly, and the husband eventually slammed out of the room, never to be seen again. After keeping their distance for a couple of days, the staff began to worry about the new bride and went into her room to check on her. An unlucky hotel maid found the bride in the bathroom, bloody and missing her head. Staff searched high and low, but her head wasn't located for days, until it was discovered in the crow's nest where the band played. Since then, guests have reported seeing a form in what appears to be a white dress descending from the crow's nest with her head tucked under her arm. The Legend of Walking Sam. Though he goes by other names as well, most notably Tall Man or Stovepipe Hat Bigfoot, most of the stories describe Walking Sam as a 7-foot-tall figure with eyes but no mouth, sometimes wearing a stovepipe hat. Near the Black Hills of South Dakota sits one of the largest Indian reservations in the country, the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. Home to the Oglala Lakota tribe, Pine Ridge has a long history of trauma. It's where hundreds of Lakota Indians were killed during the Wounded Knee Massacre. When it made headlines in 2015 for a spree of teen suicides, many began to suggest that darker supernatural forces were at work in Pine Ridge, citing the urban legend of Walking Sam. Between December of 2014 and March of 2015, there were 103 suicide attempts made. 9 of those were successful, and none of the victims were older than 25. Many died by hanging. In previous years, there had been other clusters of suicides, but none this large. Stuck in a crisis situation with no clear answers, many began to point to a sinister force that has long existed in Native American tradition and lore. Children raised in Lakota households grow up hearing of suicide spirits, stick people, or shadow people who attempt to lure adolescents from the safety of their homes at night. When Sam raises his arms, one sees the bodies of previous victims hanging beneath. When teenagers hear him calling, he tries to persuade them of their worthlessness, encouraging them to kill themselves. Some believe he targets younger people because they are more susceptible to his tricks. There are also those who believe he is not even necessarily a malicious entity, but rather one who wanders the forests as punishment and is merely looking for companionship. Finally, for a people group who have such an intertwined spiritual connection between the land and their heritage, some believe that Walking Sam is a sort of physical manifestation of the hurt and trauma that Lakota Indians experience on a regular basis. The Platte River Ship of Death. For over a century, a death ship has been seen on the Platte River about every 25 years or so. Each time, the sighting has foreshadowed the death of someone known to the witness who has had the misfortune to spot the eerie vessel. On the Platte River between Torrington and Alcava, Wyoming, a legend persists that a ship of death continues to sail upon the sometimes dangerous waters. The phantom ship is said to rise out of a strange mist that quickly becomes a massive rolling ball of fog. As the ship grows closer, witnesses report that its sails and masts are covered with frost. Upon its deck stands the crew, also covered with frost and huddled around a corpse lying on a canvas sheet. The legend continues that the ship always foreshadows the death of someone who will die on the day that it is spotted. As the crew steps back, the identity of the corpse is revealed as a person known by the witness. The first alleged sighting was made in 1862 by a trapper named Leon Weber. When the crew stepped back, the corpse revealed the body of Weber's fiancée, who died later on that same day. Another sighting of the phantom ship was made by cattleman Gene Wilson in 1887, when he saw the body of his wife laid out on the canvas. In 1903, another tale describes that when Victor Hebe was chopping down a tree on his riverfront property, he spied the ship. Laid out on the deck was the body of a close friend. Every case was reported in the late fall, and in all cases, the person seen upon the deck of the phantom ship died on the very same day. One of the sightings allegedly occurred 6 miles southeast of the town of Guernsey, Wyoming. Another sighting was said to have occurred at Bessemer Bend on the Platte River. The Cheyenne Bureau of Psychological Research is credited as the organization that tracks the reported sightings, and a handful of books document the few reports that exist on the death ship of the North Platte River. The Mercy Brown Vampire Incident. The Mercy Brown Vampire Incident occurred in Rhode Island, USA in 1892. It is one of the best documented cases of the exhumation of a corpse in order to perform rituals to banish an undead manifestation. The incident was part of the wilder New England vampire panic. According to folklore, a U.S. woman named Mercy Brown from Exeter, Rhode Island, who died in the 1800s, is a strong contender for the title of the first female vampire ever. In 1884, a farmer named George Brown lost his wife, Mary Eliza, to tuberculosis. 2 years later, he lost his eldest daughter to the same disease. Then, his son Edwin fell seriously ill. After that, 19-year-old daughter Mercy Lane Brown succumbed. At the time, little was known about tuberculosis, and most of it was based on superstition. The panicked townsfolk theorized that one of the dead was a vampire and was draining the lives of the rest of the family. it was decided that their bodies would be exhumed. The bodies of the mother and the eldest daughter showed the expected level of decomposition, so they were dismissed from suspicion. However, Mercy's corpse exhibited almost no decay and still had blood in the heart. They saw this as a sure sign that Mercy was undead and was draining the life from Edwin. Mercy's heart and liver were burned, and the ashes were mixed with a tonic and given to Edwin to drink in an effort to cure him. He died 2 months later, and Mercy's body was buried again. The story of Mercy Brown is said to have inspired Bram Stoker, who wrote Dracula, and is even referred to in books by H.P. Lovecraft. It certainly is a bloody tale, and one that will live on for generations. The Haunted Skirvin Hotel. The Skirvin Hotel was built in 1910 by oilman W.B. Skirvin, who was determined to have the finest hotel in the Southwest. Opening its doors in 1911, the plush hotel had two 10-story towers containing 224 rooms and was one of the first buildings in Oklahoma City. The Oklahoma Showplace became a popular speakeasy during Prohibition. It was during this time that W.B. Skirvin was said to have had an affair with one of the hotel maids. According to legend, the maid soon conceived, and in order to prevent a scandal, she was locked in a room on the top floor of the hotel. The desolate girl soon grew depressed, and even after the birth of her child, she was still not let out of the room. Half out of her mind, she finally grabbed the infant child and threw herself, along with the baby, out of the window. The maid's name remains unknown, but her ghost continues to haunt the Skirvin Hotel, and she was nicknamed Effie by former employees. Though the old hotel closed in 1988, former guests would often report not being able to obtain a decent night's sleep due to the consistent sounds of a child crying. Effie was apparently a woman of loose morals, and many men who have stayed in the hotel have often reported being propositioned by a female voice while alone in their rooms. Others have seen the figure of a naked woman with them while taking a shower. One man even claimed he was sexually assaulted by an invisible entity during his stay. Other strange noises and occurrences were reported by staff and guests, including things seemingly being moved around by themselves, such as the maid's cart being pushed down the hall when no one was there. In October 1979, the hotel was listed at the National Register of Historic Places. When it closed in 1988, the building stood empty for almost 15 years. However, the historic hotel has now been fully restored and now open once again for guests. Legend of the Seven Sisters Road. Located in southeast Nebraska in Otoe County is an old path known locally as Seven Sisters Road. According to local legend, 7 women were murdered here in the 1900s. There once was a young man who lived along the meandering road in an area known to have had 7 hills. Residing on a farm southeast of Nebraska County, he lived with his parents and 7 sisters. According to the tale, after having argued with his family, he was very angry. That night, he hid in the woods as his parents left the house one evening, and then, one by one, he either enticed or forced each one of his sisters outside with him. The young man then led them to the top of each hill and hanged each one of them from a tree until they were dead. Afterward, no one knows what happened to the bodies or to the brother. Furthermore, No official reports have been found to substantiate the hangings, but the legend persists. Seven Sisters Road was built through the hills years after the rumored murders, and the hanging trees were chopped down. The hills themselves have also been altered over the years, and only 4 of the hills remain prominent today. Since that fateful evening so long ago, the area is said to be haunted by the women's restless spirits. Many tales have been told over the years, including the sound of terrified women screaming for help. Others have heard bells ringing that seem to come from a nearby private cemetery. Many who have driven through the area report having problems with their cars stalling, headlights mysteriously dimming, speedometers freezing, and windows that roll up and down seemingly on their own. The Smurl Haunting. After flood damage forced them from their Wilkes-Barre home, Janet and Jack Smurl, along with their daughters and Jack's parents, moved into a Chase Street duplex in West Pittston, Pennsylvania. A bit of a fixer-upper, they put their efforts into repainting, retooling, and repairs. It was at this time that the eerie activity began. Tools went missing, then reappeared. Old wall stains seeped through the fresh coats of paint. Then, the kitchen appliances caught fire even though they were unplugged, and awful odors overwhelmed the house, only to disperse moments later. Soon, the Smurls were struggling to make ends meet. Mary, Jack's mother, suffered a heart attack. The ghostly visits, meanwhile, intensified. Mary and Jack claimed to have perceived voices that sounded like one another. Janet thought she heard her mother-in-law calling her name, while Mary thought she heard Janet and Jack in the throes of an argument laden with expletives. Ominous black masses formed and floated through the home. Janet said she was visited in the dead of night by a malevolent force that molested her in her sleep. Life in the Smurl house grew darker. A light fixture fell from the ceiling, cutting one of the daughters on impact. The family dog was thrown against the wall. Janet said she was picked up by an invisible presence and then tossed across the room. Jack claimed a succubus entered the living room and sexually assaulted him. Even neighbors reported hearing screams from the house while the family was out. Terrified, the Smurls contacted the Warrens. After inspecting the house, Lorraine Warren, a clairvoyant, concluded that the Smurls shared their home with 4 spirits: a harmless elderly woman, a young and possibly violent girl, a man who suffered and died in the home, and a demon that used the other 3 spirits to destroy the Smurl family. Representatives from the Roman Catholic Church in Scranton were uncertain as to what might be causing the activity. Multiple priests visited the Smurls to bless their home. They reportedly encountered no harmful activity. Resurrection Mary of Chicago. Since the 1930s, several men driving northeast along Archer Avenue between the Willowbrook Ballroom and Resurrection Cemetery have reported picking up a young female hitchhiker. This young woman is dressed somewhat formally in a white party dress and is said to have long blonde hair and blue eyes. There are other reports that she wears a thin shawl, dancing shoes, carries a small clutch purse, and possibly that she is very quiet. When the driver nears the Resurrection Cemetery, the young woman asks to be let out, whereupon she disappears into the cemetery. The story goes that Mary had spent the evening dancing with a boyfriend at the O. Henry Ballroom. At some point, they got into an argument and Mary stormed out. She left the ballroom and started walking up Archer Avenue. She had not gotten very far when she was struck and killed by a hit-and-run driver, who fled the scene, leaving Mary to die. Her parents found her and were grief-stricken at the sight of her dead body. They buried her in Resurrection Cemetery, wearing a beautiful white dancing dress and matching dancing shoes. The hit-and-run driver was never found. Some researchers have attempted to link Resurrection Mary to one of the many thousands of burials in Resurrection Cemetery. A particular focus of these efforts has been Mary Bregovi, who died in 1934, although her death came in an automobile accident in the downtown Chicago Loop. Chicago author Ursula Bilski in 1999 documented a possible connection to Anna Maria Norkus, who died in a 1927 auto accident while on her way home from the O. Henry Ballroom, a theory which has gained popularity in recent years. The Seven Gates of Hell. There are two popular versions of the myth, each with numerous variations. One states that a mental institution used to be located on either Todd Road or Trout Run Road, depending on the source, in Pelham Township, Pennsylvania. It was erected in a remote location so as to isolate people deemed insane from the rest of the world. One day in the 1900s, a fire broke out, and, due to its remoteness, firefighters could not reach the hospital in time to save it. Many patients died in the flames, while others escaped and were soon beaten to death. The gates' role in the story is disputed. Some say that the gates were put up by the local search party to trap the remaining inmates. Others say that, completely unrelated to the asylum story, an eccentric physician who lived on the property built several gates along a path deep in the forest. Both accounts agree on only one gate being visible during the day, but the other 6 can be seen at night. According to the legend, no one has ever passed the 5th gate, but if they passed all 7, they would go directly to hell. The Ratman of South End. Quite how the Ratman came to be remains debated. Two competing theories seem to have grown to explain the origins of a strange, ghostly creature said to lurk in an underpass close to South End Victoria Station. One version of events is that a former mayor of South End, a frequent adulterer, was punished for his waywardness after his son was born mutated. The infant possessed the face, hands, and tail of a rat. As the child grew, he also developed a taste for flesh. To conceal his secret shame, the mayor locked the creature away in an underground cell constructed alongside the underpass. Despite its incarceration, hunger would drive the Ratman to escape in the hopes of preying on anyone unfortunate enough to be found using the underpass. In what seems to be the more common version of the story, the Ratman is described as a ghost rather than a living creature. Seeking shelter from heavy rain, a homeless man took to sleeping in the underpass. Old and unsteady, one night he was attacked by a group of local drunks who beat their vulnerable victim badly and stole the blanket he used to keep warm. Left lying in the underpass, he eventually succumbed to hypothermia. The story goes that when he was eventually found, the rats that inhabit the area had eaten away his face. Since then, many locals claim that at night they hear strange noises in the underpass, including the scratching of claws being dragged along the walls and high-pitched squeaking. Legend of the Parson and Clerk Cliff. Many versions of this story exists. It is related that a certain bishop of Exeter fell ill and came to Dawlish to restore his health. However, an ambitious local priest aimed to succeed to the see, the seat within a bishop's diocese where his cathedral is located, in the event of his superior's demise. The priest's guide was his clerk, and they often made the journey to check on the condition of the bishop. One night, in a terrible storm, whilst crossing Holden Moor, they lost their way and found themselves miles from the correct path. The priest, in his frustration, abused his clerk with the words, "I would rather have the devil himself than you for a guide." At that moment, a horseman rode by and volunteered to be their guide. After a few miles, they came across a brilliantly lit mansion and were invited by their guide to enter and partake of his hospitality. They enjoyed a sumptuous repast, and in the midst of the merriment, the news arrived that the bishop was dead. Eager to secure his chance for promotion, the priest prepared to leave, together with the clerk and the guide. However, the horses refused to move. After liberal use of his whip and spurs, the priest cried, "Devil take the brutes," upon which the guide exclaimed, "Thank you, sir," and shouted, "Giddy up." The horses galloped over the cliff, carrying the parson and the clerk with them. The devil turned them both to stone, facing forever seaward, monuments to greed and disappointed ambition. The parson and clerk and the cliffs are easily viewed from the southwest coast path, which follows the Exeter to Newton Abbot railway line along the coast between Parson's Tunnel and Tynemouth. The killer in the back seat. The legend involves a woman who is driving and being followed by a car or truck. The mysterious pursuer flashes his high beams, tailgates her, and sometimes even rams her vehicle. When she finally makes it home, she realizes that the driver was trying to warn her that there was a man, a murderer or escaped mental patient, hiding in her back seat. Each time the man set up to attack her, the driver behind had used his high beams to scare the killer, causing him to duck back down. In some versions, the woman stops for gas, and the attendant asks her to come inside to sort out a problem with her credit card. Inside the station, he asks if she knows that there's a man in her back seat. In another version, the woman gets into her car, and then a crazed person leaps out of nowhere and starts shouting gibberish and slamming their hands on the car. The woman quickly manages to escape from them, but no matter how far or which direction she drives, every time she stops, the same crazed person appears and attacks the car. The woman then arrives at a police station and tells the police about the crazed person. The police calm her down and offer to drive her back to her house, but when they go with her to get her things from the car, they find the killer hiding behind the driver's seat. As it turns out, the crazed person that was chasing the woman was the ghost of one of the killer's victims, trying to either warn the woman or get at the killer. The Babysitter, a scary urban legend. The legend details a teenage girl who is watching television at night while babysitting after the children have been put to bed upstairs. The phone rings. The unknown caller tells her, "Check the children." The girl dismisses the call, but the anonymous caller dials back several times, and the girl becomes increasingly frightened. Eventually, the babysitter calls the police, who inform her they will trace the next call. After the stranger calls again, the police return her call, advising her to leave immediately. She evacuates the home, and the police meet her to explain that the calls were coming from inside the house and that the unidentified prowler was calling her after killing the children upstairs. In more modern versions, rather than be tormented by menacing phone calls, the babysitter is unnerved by what she assumes to be a hideous, life-size statue of a clown in the corner of the room. When the mother or father of the children she is caring for calls home to check in, the babysitter asks if she can cover the clown statue with a blanket. The parent informs the babysitter they do not own a clown statue. The statue was really a murderer who attacks and kills the girl before she can escape. In other versions, years later, the babysitter is now an adult and has a family of her own. One evening, she and her husband go to have dinner out while a babysitter looks after the children. The evening is going well until a waiter approaches their table and says that there is a phone call for her. She then answers the phone and hears, "Did you check the children?" Robert the Doll. The doll originally belonged to Robert Eugene Odo, an artist described as eccentric, who belonged to a prominent Key West family. The doll was reportedly manufactured by the Stief Company of Germany, purchased by Otto's grandfather while on a trip to Germany in 1904, and given to young Otto as a birthday gift. The doll's sailor suit was likely an outfit that Otto wore as a child. According to legend, the doll has supernatural abilities to allow it to move, change its facial expressions, and make giggling sounds. Some versions of the legend claim that a young girl of Bohemian descent gave Otto the doll as a gift or as retaliation for a wrongdoing. Other stories claim that the doll moved voodoo figurines around the room and was aware of what went on around him. Others claim that the doll vanished after Otto's house changed ownership a number of times after his death, or that young Otto triggered the doll's supernatural powers by blaming his childhood mishaps on the doll. According to local folklore, the doll has caused car accidents, broken bones, job loss, divorce, and a cornucopia of other misfortunes, and museum visitors supposedly experience post-visit misfortunes for failing to respect Robert. The first hint that something out of the ordinary was happening was one night when Otto, who was only 10 years old, awoke to find Robert the doll sitting at the end of his bed, staring at him. Moments later, his mother was awakened by his screams for help and the sounds of furniture being overturned in her son's bedroom. Otto cried for help, begging his mother to rescue him. When she finally was able to wrench the locked door open, she saw poor Otto curled up in fear on his bed, his room in shambles, and Robert the doll sitting at the foot of the bed. Otto's parents would often hear their son upstairs talking to the doll and getting a response back in a totally different voice. They reported seeing the doll speak and witnessing his expression change. Giggling and sightings of Robert running up the steps or staring out their upstairs window were also reported. To this day, Robert the doll can be seen on display in Key West, Florida. The Witch Girl of Pilot's Knob. In the 1910s, in the small town of Marion, Kentucky, the townsfolk believed that Mary Evelyn Ford and her mother were witches. Instead of taking the mother and daughter duo through the traditional judicial system, they immediately sentenced them to be burned alive, as they were accused of being witches. Mary Evelyn Ford was 6 years old. Her mother's charred corpse was buried somewhere far from Marion, and the little girl was decidedly buried in Pilot Knob. The townsfolk believed her spirit would return to take revenge, and so they buried the girl in a still-lined grave. They covered her casket with concrete and gravel instead of dirt, and surrounded her grave with a white fence made of interconnecting crosses. Town folklore states that this little girl's spirit cannot cross the gate around her grave, but she reaches out to anyone who dares to come near. She can pull a mortal into her grave, and it is said that she makes faces to provoke people so she can get them near enough to pull you into her gated area. On the other side of the fence lies something much darker: the Watcher. He is an evil presence that is trying to get to the little girl but cannot. He cannot cross over the crosses which guard and entrap her. Instead, he carefully attempts to snatch her soul and chases any bystander away. Some have claimed to witness tiny footprints appearing in the gravel, or even a young ghostly figure trying to escape the gravesite. It's upon the reader to whether believe this story or brush it aside as a mere fabrication of some prankster. The Devil's Rocking Chair. The horror began in July 1980 when David Glatzel, 11, became possessed by a demon. One night, he woke up screaming, claiming that he had been visited by a man with big black eyes, a thin face with animal features, jagged teeth, pointed ears, horns, and hooves. He became withdrawn. His older sister, Debbie, asked her fiancé, Arne Johnson, if he would stay with her family for a while and see whether it would help David get out of his depression. But things didn't get better. David reported more nightmares about the terrifying man, who promised to take his soul. Odd scratches and bruises began to appear on the boy, and all the injuries seemed to happen while he was asleep. David began to claim seeing the beast while he was awake. He was always seen sitting in the family's rocking chair, which the beast now claimed as his own. David, and later Lorraine Warren, was the only one who saw the beast in the chair, but family members often saw it rocking back and forth, seemingly under its own power. The family first brought over a priest to bless the house. This didn't help. In fact, it made things worse. David's visions increased, and he began to hiss at his family and speak with multiple voices. The Glatzels called Ed and Lorraine Warren, who began making regular visits to their home and performing exorcisms. Many of those exorcisms took place while David was seated in the rocking chair. The chair itself moved about the house on its own. Most incredibly, it levitated on numerous occasions in full view of witnesses, including the Warrens, clergy members, and shocked family members. After a final exorcism, the demon left David and he showed improvement. However, his sister's fiancé was not so lucky. Apparently, the demon left David and entered him. He started making the same kind of growls and hisses that David had made, as well as slipping into trances for months before killing his landlord. For years after the horrifying events of 1980, the rocking chair remained in storage. When the Glatzel family later moved, it went with them. Today, the Devil's Chair is at the Haunted Museum. The Surrency Haunting. The Surrencys loved their home. They loved their farm, and most of all, they loved each other until things took a turn. Pretty much out of the blue, random things began to happen around the house. Windows slamming shut and flying open right in front of them, doors slamming violently without warning or action. Things quickly grew worse as objects constantly flew off of shelves. Their old clock would only strike 13 with the hands wildly spinning around. Every meal the Surrencys ate at their table would end up in their laps, thrown across the room at the walls or on the floor. Their utensils weren't even safe, bending or twisting by an unknown force while in their hands. At night, the Surrencys would see pairs of evil, beady red eyes around their property, as if they were being watched each and every time the sun went down. The family grew weary, losing sleep and no longer eating because of the continuous violence and torment. There were many theories. One included the idea that Mr. Surrency worshipped the devil. Another suggested that the Surrency family were strongly psychic and the ghosts were simply trying to receive help. Since the family couldn't help, the ghosts just became more and more enraged. Eventually, the ghosts became more violent, specifically targeting the youngest girl in the house. They would take her blankets in the middle of the night, lift her out of bed when she was sleeping, painfully pull her hair at random times, and flip her bed over sideways. The Surrency family decided enough was enough, and they would leave their beloved farm. However, the ghosts had different plans on that fateful day. The day their decision was made to move, a fireplace poker was lifted out of its resting place, floated down the hallway, and struck one of the boys on the head repeatedly. The younger brother helplessly watched as the poker retreated back to its original place. Soon after that incident, the Surrency family moved, and as for the haunted ghost vortex they once called home, it ended up burning down in 1925 after being abandoned for years. To this day, the land the house sat on, it is said to still be haunted by the entities that tormented the Surrency family. El Coco from Spanish folklore. In Spain, Portugal, and Latin America, parents sometimes invoke the Coco or Cuca as a way of discouraging their children from misbehaving. They sing lullabies or tell rhymes warning their children that if they don't obey their parents, El Coco will come and get them and then eat them. It is not the way the Coco looks, but what it does that scares most. It is a child eater and a kidnapper. It may immediately devour the child, leaving no trace, or it may spirit the child away to a place of no return. But it only does this to disobedient children. It is on the lookout for children's misbehavior from the rooftops. It takes the shape of any dark shadow and stays watching. It represents the opposite of the guardian angel and is frequently compared to the devil. There is no general description of the Kukui as far as facial or body descriptions, but it is stated that the shape-shifting being is extremely horrible to look at. The Coco is variously described as a shapeless figure, sometimes a hairy monster that hides in closets or under beds, and eats children that misbehave when they are told to go to bed. Lucinda, the stony hollow spirit of Iowa. During the day, this road is like any other Iowa farm road. There isn't much traffic, but occasionally cars are stuck behind tractors, and it's a useful back road in the Burlington area. At night, though, the road is deserted. Locals know better than to travel down Stony Hollow Road after dark. On the side of the road, there's a cliff that towers over the asphalt. This is the place where you'll find the road's ghost, Lucinda. Legend goes that Lucinda was waiting for her husband at this very spot, but he was terribly late. Assuming he had run away with another woman, she climbed to the top and jumped to her death. Tragically, her husband showed up to find his bride. He had been delayed due to his wagon getting stuck in the mud. The faint figure of the suicidal bride should appear towards the top of the cliff. Be aware, though, that if the ghost of Lucinda lays a rose at your feet, it means you too will meet a tragic fate within the next day or two. While Lucinda sure seems like a ghost you wouldn't want to meet, summoning her spirit on Stony Hollow Road is an Iowa ghost hunting tradition. To this day, the spot on the road remains haunted. Head here after dark and shout her name, Lucinda, 3 times. Be warned, though, that she is easily scared away. Best to go alone. Or is it a ruse to get you alone? No one knows. The legendary phoenix from Greek mythology. The phoenix is a long-lived immortal bird associated with Greek mythology, with analogs in many cultures, that cyclically regenerates or is otherwise born again. Associated with the sun, a phoenix obtains new life by arising from the ashes of its predecessor. Some legends say it dies in a show of flames and combustion. Others that it simply dies and decomposes before being born again. The Egyptian phoenix was said to be as large as an eagle, with brilliant scarlet and gold plumage and a melodious cry. Only one phoenix existed at any time, and it was very long-lived. No ancient authority gave it a lifespan of less than 500 years. As its end approached, the phoenix fashioned a nest of aromatic boughs and spices, set it on fire, and was consumed in the flames. From the pyre miraculously sprang a new phoenix, which, after embalming its father's ashes in an egg of myrrh, flew with the ashes to Heliopolis, city of the sun, in Egypt, where it deposited them on the altar in the temple of the Egyptian god of the sun, Re. In Islamic mythology, the phoenix was identified with the Anka, Persian Smurl, a huge mysterious bird, probably a heron, that was originally created by God with all perfections, but thereafter became a plague and was killed. There are several variations on the tale of the phoenix, but most versions say that the phoenix resides in paradise. This land is said to be a perfect world that was beyond the sun, and was sometimes considered to be a representation of heaven. However, there were also other versions of the story that gave other locations as residences of the phoenix. One location that was claimed to be the home of the phoenix was the Heliopolis, city of the sun. This may be because the Heliopolis was where the phoenix was entombed after death. In some versions of the story, this is also where the phoenix was reborn. The Greeks claimed that the phoenix was known to live next to a well in Arabia. According to their records, the phoenix bathed itself in the well every morning at dawn and sang a song so beautiful that Apollo himself, the sun god, had to stop his chariots in the sky to listen to the melody. And that, dear listeners, is the end of tonight's creepy urban myths. I hope that you are resting well and have found your way to Slumberland. Until then, I'll read to you later.